Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss our favorite alternate costumes in gaming. So this doesn't matter if it's unlockable costumes, palette swaps. Unfortunately, in today's gaming world, it's probably DLC you had to pay for because, it wasn't even in the game. But in general, our favorite unlockable costumes from however long ago when you started gaming up to now, I want to know your favorite. So like I said, even if it's just, you were playing Street Fighter and you like Color 2 more than Color 1, that's all it takes. So definitely let me know your favorite alternate costumes in the comments below. Also, check out my favorite DLC episode. I thought that was a good one, so definitely check that one out and let me know your favorite DLC when you watch that one. But kicking things off with Capcom, of course. I'm not going to start with Resident Evil, but of course it's going to be in here. I am going to start with Street Fighter because especially Street Fighter 4, when they finally finished however many versions, I swear it had like 4 or 5 versions. It was definitely on par with Street Fighter 2. I don't think they're going to go back to that ever again, which I hope they don't, but that was definitely one that was like, okay, you got like 100 million versions of this. By the time that finished, I swear there were like 20 colors per person, but even when I had the original version, because that's the only one I had for a long time till I bought is it Arcade Edition or Championship? I don't remember, but you know whatever the last one was, for the 4th or 5th version of the game, I bought on Steam, and then there were a million costumes. But when I was first playing it, it was as simple as the color swap. I think, Ryu had one that was like a black gi, and it was like, oh, I like black, so that's cool. And Sakura had one, which I wish I could remember, it's been so long since I played, but I know I like her original outfit. But she also had one that was probably like, the skirt was black or the gloves were black or something like that, and it was like, that's cool, because I like black and white. So there were definitely some color swaps in there, but they of course have quite a few costumes, and I mentioned this, I think, in my crossover episode. It's surprising they don't have more costumes from other franchises, because even though I never bought the game, my automatic bias forces me to say that the Street Fighter V Resident Evil crossover costumes are automatically some of my favorite costumes, because it's Resident Evil, it's my favorite franchise. So I never even bought Street Fighter V. I think I played it maybe once. I honestly don't remember. But it had Resident Evil costumes, so automatically those are going to be some of my favorites, even though I didn't get to experience them. Like, innate bias towards Resident Evil. It's like, they were great. Of course they were. It was Resident Evil. It's automatically amazing. But moving to actual Resident Evil, it's one of the franchises that has like the most unlockables in general when it comes to costumes and stuff. And there are quite a few where it's like, okay, I really like this costume. Once again, the age of the remakes and stuff, we already got to the point of being like, well, if you buy this deluxe version, you get all these costumes, but if you don't, you can unlock these couple of costumes. So I have quite a few costumes from like the RE2 remake. Well, I can't say anything for the RE3 remake because they didn't do crap with that, which still blows my mind. Like, they put 2 costumes in that game. But for the Resident Evil 2 remake, I love some of the alternate costumes, especially for Claire. Like, I think she had the best ones because her noir costume I thought was really cool. I like Leon's, but I think Claire's looks really, really cool. So I like Claire's noir costume, and I like her Elza Walker costume because as a giant Resident Evil fan, that was an insane reveal when they're like, hey, this is one of the alternate costumes, and they put an Elza Walker skin in there. For anyone who's not familiar with that, you can just look up Resident Evil 1.5. Before 2 came out, they had like an entire version of the game that they scrapped. Elza Walker was going to be the other playable character, paired with Leon instead of Claire. So that was just a crazy one, and it was like, yes, this is absolutely amazing. Love that costume. Love the noir costume. Of course, I think my favorite costume would have to be like the PS1 graphics costumes that they made for Leon and Claire. I think those are absolutely amazing. And that's not even the first time they did that, at least not for Leon, because in RE6 they had that, and I think I mentioned this in my DLC thing. They had that years ago, whenever RE6 came out, which has probably been quite a minute when you really put the numbers down. But they had that in RE6, and every character had it, which was something that they really should have kept. They should have kept that as like a staple for the entire franchise. Like, I don't think that's really going to happen anymore. Maybe, when we get our next remake, maybe they'll put it back in, but they could have done like a PS1 blocky thing for Jill and Carlos in RE3. When the RE4 remake came out, it wouldn't exactly be the same thing because, of course, that came out on GameCube. So if they did a slightly polygonal version, they could have done that. Dead Space actually does it, which I thought was super cool. The Dead Space remake actually has like an OG costume thing, just like Resident Evil does, and it's Isaac Clarke from the original game, and it's like, oh, he's like a little bit more blocky. Like you can kind of see it's funny because the graphics are so good when you actually play it. It's like something's off, but you can't really tell. But once you like just look at the model, it's like, oh, it actually has like kind of old school graphics to it. I don't think I even noticed that until I actually saw it pointed out in the video, because normally you're kind of just running and gunning. But I thought that was super cool. I thought that was really well done. I was like, oh, I didn't realize they did that. They have some other crazy alternate costumes if you buy like the deluxe edition for the Dead Space remake, and those have some crazy ones. Like there's one where it's basically he's like in the armor of the cultists that exist within the game, and if you do a cutscene, sometimes Isaac will like take his helmet off, and if you have that costume on and you take the helmet off, he doesn't have a head. And I thought that was a really cool feature. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Once again, that was a deluxe edition thing, so I never experienced that myself outside of seeing it in videos, but I thought that was a really great feature, and it's just a crazy costume. Still very unfortunate that game never got a photo mode. I would have bought the deluxe costumes if I could have been taking pictures of them, but sadly it wasn't the case. But I do like those alternate costumes. I don't know, that's an interesting one. If we're counting like upgraded costumes, because Dead Space is the only one I can really think of that would do that, where it's like, hey, here's an actual upgrade to the costume and you just get a new outfit. So I don't know if you guys want to count that, we might as well, just to talk about, more favorite costumes. But going back to Resident Evil, because of course I was playing it the other night, so I was thinking about this. Some of the costumes that I really enjoy are when they do like the updated versions of classic outfits. But one of my favorites is from RE0, where they actually do the prototype costume for Rebecca, because Resident Evil 0, once again a random Resident Evil fact for anyone that didn't know this, was originally made for the GameCube, or not for the GameCube, sorry, it was made for the N64, and then they ported it over to the GameCube because they were so far in production. It was like, hey, let's just throw this on a different console. So when that originally came out, Rebecca had a costume that looked a lot more like Jill's costume, except it was just white and green. And they put that prototype costume in like the Resident Evil 0. I don't think it was in the original version. I think it was when they like put it out on PS4, and they had like a million different costumes there. So that was a really cool thing where they actually added even more costumes to an older game. I thought that was super cool back in the day. They even have like fan costumes, because that was back when they were doing like the RENet thing, and it was like, hey, if you want to design a custom outfit, maybe we'll choose it. And they did like voting things, and people got to have their own costumes in the game. Like if I had done one and it was in Resident Evil 0, like that would be one of the craziest things ever. So I'm sure there are people out there that are like, holy crap, like forever I have my alternate costumes in Resident Evil 0. And some of them are pretty good. There was one that I remember, I think it was the Jill sandwich one, that ended up making it into the actual game. But they had a million costumes, at least for Rebecca. Much like the Resident Evil 3 remake, they kind of gypped us when it came to Billy. They gave him like 2 or 3 extra costumes, and it was cool. They were references to other Capcom franchises, which was a cool idea, but they weren't the best. And it was really unfortunate. Like we got like 100 million costumes for Rebecca, and then for Billy they were like, here's like 2 or 3 more, like here, and that was it. So that was an unfortunate element of that, where they just didn't give him a lot. But Rebecca's costumes were definitely really cool, especially the prototype one, and then she has quite a few. There's so many, honestly, I can't really remember all of them, and not all of them I played. But I think she had one that was like a cheerleader outfit, but it was like in Capcom colors. That was kind of cool. And they also had her in her outfit where in Resident Evil 2, if you get the picture from Wesker's desk where it's her in like the basketball uniform, that was an alternate costume that they put in as well, which is like, oh, okay. They, like those are the little things where it's like, oh, they're paying attention to stuff that the community talks about. Like, why the F does Wesker have that picture? Still weird. But a million different options for her, and then like 3 new options for Billy. Still crazy that they did that to him. I was like, that's a little messed up. Like nothing. That's all you got. Okay. But Resident Evil, of course, still has a bunch of other ones, but I'm sticking with Capcom. We're gonna move over to Devil May Cry, and this I won't really say is one of my favorite alternate costumes, but it's one that sticks out in my head as definitely like one of the most memorable ones, because this was back in the PS2 era, where it was like, hey, here's an actual company teaming up with a video game franchise for some unlockable costumes, like licensed branded costumes, which who knows when that'll really happen again. It's very rare. I mean, technically, we did have it with Spider-Man 2. They had the Adidas thing, and Miles came out in that horrible costume that we all make fun of. All he had to do was put the top on it. It's the fact that like his hair, it makes it weird. Like the costume itself, I think is actually all right, for me, it's just like it's weird and it's very comic booky. But if his hair was covered and it was like a regular Spider-Man costume, it would be so much better. But within that realm of things, with alternate costumes and like I said, actual companies doing branded stuff, Devil May Cry 2 and that Diesel collaboration they had back in the day, where if you beat the game, they had actual Diesel branded merch for both Dante and Lucia. And Dante had like a crazy jacket and a scarf and like blue jeans. Lucia, I remember, I think I actually liked her outfit. She kind of had a jacket that was somewhat akin to Leon's jacket from like the OG RE4, where it was like the, I guess it would be like just like the cotton where you can see it sticking up and everything. So I thought those were cool. I wouldn't say they're my favorite, but they're definitely interesting, and they, like I said, they stick out. And like I said, I like Lucia's more than I like Dante's. I don't think I ever really liked the sort of scarf look on him. I thought it was like, it looks a little weird to me. But I definitely like Lucia's costume. I thought that was pretty nice. And then, like I said, Dante's was all right. Like it was just okay. And they also have some pretty decent costumes throughout, the Devil May Cry franchise. I like some of the stuff they do for DMC3, where you're basically, they kind of give you like Sparta's image of him in, I guess, his human form, if that's how you want to put it, where he has like, the purple jacket and everything. It's like, okay, this is kind of cool. Once again, even back then I was like, not exactly like my favorite costume ever, but it's okay. Like, it's all right. It's an interesting, sort of style that they have there. So Devil May Cry has a couple. I normally stick to kind of the classic costumes when it comes to that. So I'm normally just okay. Like, all right, I like what Dante's wearing. If I'm able to play as Virgil, I'm good. I like what Virgil's wearing, so I don't really have to change costumes or anything like that. Their regular designs are so good to me. I'm like, hey, I'm pretty set when it comes to Dante and Virgil. Like, they always look pretty cool. And same with Nero, honestly. When he came out in 4, I thought he looked cool. I think he looks cool in 5 as well. So all their regular costumes, I think, are pretty decent. And then, once again, buy the deluxe edition or whatever, they had like color swaps for 5. I thought all of them sucked. If I'm being totally honest, it was like it changed their hair color and things like that. Some of the costumes would be okay. I think Dante has one where like he has like a white jacket, it's like white and black or something like that, and that's okay. But it also changes their hair, and I was just like, I am not a fan of this. So I was never big on the EX color swaps, is what they called them, and I was just like, they all changed their hair colors and stuff, and I'm like, this doesn't really work well for me. So unfortunate, but those were like the costumes that we got back then. I would have loved it if they'd given us updated versions of his older costumes, especially because of how long it took for 5 to actually come out. I would have loved it if they were like, hey, here's DMC 1, 2, 3, and 4 for all, whoever was in the game, here's an alternate costume. I would have loved that. It's kind of weird. They actually don't do that in the DMC games. I don't think they did it for any of them. I could be wrong about that. So, it's been quite a minute since I played the older DMC games, but I'm pretty sure they've never actually done it where it's like, hey, here's just the old costumes redone. I don't think they've ever done it. Not like how Resident Evil will do it, where it's like, hey, here's, you're playing RE4, here's RE2 Leon, or, heck, even Ada gets her old costume. Well, she gets a remake costume, not her original costume, but, she has her original RE4, or she has her remake 2 costume, and then they made like an alternate version of her original RE4 costume. Luis gets his original RE4 costume. So like they did stuff in there where it's like, hey, I think that's something that's almost been a staple of Resident Evil, honestly, since Resident Evil 3. I think that was the first time they did it, because Jill was the first recurring character in a game, and you could get her RE1 costume, which RE3, another, set of amazing costumes. Specifically, of course, Resident Evil 3 came out at the same time as Dino Crisis. It must be referenced, and it's very appropriate when it comes to RE3. That was, they literally came out at the same time. I got both those games for Christmas, and both games had a demo for each other. And so I was like, it just feels good to tie those games together. And of course, when Resident Evil 3 came out, it was like, hey, the first unlockable costume you get, RE1 Jill. That makes sense. Here's her original costume. Here you go. The second costume that you can unlock is Regina from Dino Crisis, and then you just have Regina's costume on in Resident Evil 3, and it looks really good. It's weird that they don't have that in Dino Crisis 3, because I'm pretty sure they don't have a Resident Evil costume for her. where they did a back and forth thing. So I'm kind of surprised by that, where they don't have a reference to it. But she has some crazy costumes. She has like a cool dinosaur costume, where kind of Flintstones inspired. And if I'm not mistaken, if you choose that costume, it also changes all your guns to like bones and stuff like that. So that's a cool addition. I would love it if more costumes had that feature to it, where it's like, hey, you chose, I don't know, like some swim-based outfit or like a swimsuit or something like that, and then it changes all your guns to like water guns or something, or like at the very least, like change the effects to just water shooting out instead of it looking like bullets. That would be really cool. That's the, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I feel like that's the type of thing we aren't going to get anymore. I think that stopped in like the PS2 era, where it's like, here's just like funny unlockable stuff, and it's like, it's sad we don't really get that. We still do. It's not to say it's completely dead and gone. Always, if you ever want anything to help bring you back to the old school days, depending on how old you are, just go indie. Find an indie game, look for a genre. It's there, and you're probably going to get like some really interesting unlockables, and just people that actually have a passion for what they're doing within the game. So always check your indies. Somebody out there is doing some cool unlockables, some cool costumes, cool extra modes, actual unlockables and stuff like that, classic cheat codes. Always do that. But speaking of, well, I guess we can't say indie, but Shredder's Revenge, which, let me tell you, I cannot wait for what is that game? The Marvel Cosmic Invasion. I am hyped for that game. I cannot wait, because I love Shredder's Revenge. That was a great game. Has a bunch of characters in it, bunch of different costumes. They did an amazing job with that. You can have like old NES style sprites for the characters. They have like comic versions for the characters where they're in black and white, or the turtles are in black and white except for their bandanas. They have like their colors. Usagi Yojimbo is in there in just straight black and white. He looks sick in that. But I love what they did with the costumes in that game. And those are more than palette swaps, because they even call them palette. Like it shows palette 1, 2. I think there's like 8 or 9. I think they added more like through each DLC. They kept adding more on. But they look so different. It's not just like, okay, you change the color here. It is more than just a palette swap. They're actual different costumes. So they did a great job in that game. If you haven't played Shredder's Revenge, you are really missing out. If you even remotely like beat 'em ups, you need to play Shredder's Revenge, because that game's absolutely amazing. And I can't wait for Cosmic Invasion. I recently watched an interview where they talked about alternate costumes and stuff, and they're like, there's going to be palette swaps compared to alternate costumes, and they actually said something really interesting, which was, it takes so much work for them to do, if they were going to do like full costume swaps. It was like, hey, if we're going to do that, we might as well just make a new character. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. But they do have palette swaps. So, like Wolverine's in there, and they have him like in his classic, he's in like the brown and yellow. Never really, or brown and orange, I guess, technically. That was never really my favorite. I am more of a blue and yellow person. I just think it looks better. But I know people love the brown. It's just not my thing. I always thought it was like, not really my thing. But color swaps, definitely cool. Like I said, for Ninja Turtles, they went above and beyond. They had like some crazy costumes in there that I thought were super cool, where it's like, hey, here's basically a version from like every different cartoon. They had like all the different cartoon versions. You could switch costumes, which would literally like add designs and marks, because if you watch like Rise of the TMNT, the characters had basically like tattoos and stuff for the characters. So they added that in. They added like the 2003 version. Like I said, they had comic book versions where they're black and white except for their bandanas. Like old NES style, where they were literally just like the green palettes from back in the day, which of course I thought were kind of ugly, so I didn't use that myself. But for nostalgia purposes, especially if you have like everybody doing it, it's like, man, that looks really good. You have like the whole team do like the same color palette, and it's like, this is actually really nice. So once again, little stuff like that, where it's like, hey, it's a fun beat 'em up and some alternate costumes, or palette swaps. Those are really well done. That's where, like I said, they call it a palette swap, but I'm like, man, like they literally, you're like, from this version of the cartoon from, 2012, or here's like the 2003 cartoon version, or here's like, the old school comic version. Even Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo actually had palette swaps, because they had comic book versions of the Turtles, where if you play the game, they were kind of the cartoon version where they were more, like a lighter green, but you could actually switch their color palette in the options menu, and you could switch to the comic version, and they were dark green, so they look kind of like how they do in the movies, where they're, the darker green. And I remember when I first actually figured that out back in the day, I was like, holy crap, these are like different costumes. Like, you can make them actually look different. I had no idea what it was, and it was like, comic version, cartoon version, and that was very cool. So like I said, look towards the indie / AA space. check out beat 'em ups. You know, they will. Somebody in there is doing some good stuff costume-wise, and fighting games in general, of course. You know, whether it's beat 'em up or classic 1v1 situations, tons of color swaps, tons of different costumes, all that good stuff. But like I said, with the era we're in, you may or may not have to pay for those these days instead of just being able to happily unlock them like it used to be. So that's unfortunate, but that's kind of where we are sometimes. Not 100%, but sometimes that's kind of where we are. But that's where I'm going to end things. Talked about a lot of decent costumes. I'm sure there are like a million other ones that I didn't think about. Shout out to Uncharted. They had a bunch of just like silly stuff in there, like the fat Nathan Drake. I always thought that was funny. Switching to other characters was always cool, but I guess I can't really count that as a alternate costumes. But the fat Drake, you definitely can. That was a funny one. That was a good one. I think he even had like they added effects. Once again, kind of left in that sort of era. But if you had him as like fat Drake, I think they like changed his voice, which I thought was interesting. So that was funny back in the day. But want to know your favorite costumes. Like I said, your favorite alternate costumes in general, whether it's unlockables from back in the day. Sadly, paid for DLC, it's still an alternate costume. We still got some good ones. Even if we paid for them, they're still pretty sweet. Resident Evil, that's just how they do it now, where it's like, hey, deluxe version of whatever remake, here's the classic, like 4 extra classic costumes. Even the RE4 remake had some alternate costumes. They had a bunch of them, actually, which, once again, I wish 3 did some stuff, but that's not what this is about. Would love to know your favorite alternate costumes in games. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.